Hello there ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to what I painted this month for August 2016. And this is pretty much on time, this video, so that's a first I think. As you can see here, we've got a bit of Stormcast Eternal Age of Sigmar action going on, with the Lord Celestant on Dracoth, and then we have a few terrain pieces for Deadzone. So let's dive straight into some close-up images, shall we? And let's start with the terrain. So all these pieces were made from the new Deadzone version 2 starter set, combined with the Infestation expansion, combined with another few little pieces I had left over from my last batch of Deadzone Terrain. I haven't used absolutely everything though, there's still quite a few pieces yet to be painted and a few that I'm just using as little bridges and so on, and various pipes that aren't connected up yet, that are going to connect the buildings eventually, but in a kind of modular way so they won't be glued on permanently. You can see what I've gone for here from the top. It's supposed to look like the building has suffered some kind of horrific explosion in the middle of it. So I've tried to build this terrain around a kind of empty ball, which is where the explosion took place. You can see from this lower angle here that the middle floor has barely any floor on it, if you will, at all. Barely any walls, and then the top floor has a lot more, going for that kind of spherical emptiness to represent the area of the explosion. You can see from this angle as well, and there's a nice bit of broken pipe there on the left. You can see that wall closest to the camera is almost completely gone, and then the wall on the other side actually has some structure left. So the explosion was more focused towards where you're sitting right now. Lots of blood and rust going on there, which are pretty standard, just the Citadel technical paints with blood for the blood god, for the blood, and the Typhus corrosion and riser rust for the rust effects, following the way that those paints are supposed to be applied. Underneath that is just the usual, primed black, sprayed in grey, heavily watered down black paint as a wash. Wipe most of that away so it only remains in the crevices, then dry brush the whole thing with a very light grey. So it's very simple to do, but also quite effective I think. Not like some of the heavily airbrushed Deadzone Terrain that you see some people do, which I'm not a huge fan of, because it doesn't quite look dirty and natural enough for my liking. It's very smooth, but that's not what I'm going for. Going for very gritty. You can see here lots of the individual little rivets which have rust around them, and building this was a lot of fun as usual. Deadzone Terrain always is. If you look in the top left of your picture there, you can see that there's blood on the top of that grate, and you can probably just see from this angle underneath there's a blood puddle where it's kind of dripped down through the grating and landed on the next floor. I'm not sure if you can see it very well here, but it is there, trust me. I tried to have some kind of logic to all the blood drippings, so that it'll start in one spot and then wherever gravity would take it, that's where I apply it. You can see in another piece of terrain in a minute that I try to have a little bit of narrative as well going on. So this is two separate pieces of terrain which obviously don't have to be put together, but that's how they're intended. So nice and modular. And there it is from the back. So you can see that wall is fairly intact compared to the other side, there's just that big gaping hole in it there. And you can see there's some pipe work going on around the side there, which has also been sheared off by some kind of explosion. Here's the next piece. Now this is some kind of technical building. You can see there's fans up on the second floor, and between them there's the end of a pipe, so something industrial. And then when we look inside, you can see that there are computer screens and keyboards and stuff around there. And the ladder, hopefully you can see that it has blood, either hand or footprints, from climbing up there. And that is a little narrative that we follow all the way to the upper floor, because there's a bit of a blood pool where someone's passed from the ladder onto that platform there, and then they've walked over, there's blood trail going all the way over to the other fan, where they have obviously slumped and blood has pooled there. And I don't think I took a picture of the back of this piece for some reason, but there is blood trickling down there as well. So it just adds a little something, and a lot of rust going on in there as well. So, what have I got left to paint as far as Deadzone Terrain goes? I've got a few little platforms and bridges to do, a few pieces of rubble, some generators and so forth, but I think I've definitely got enough terrain now, enough main terrain pieces and buildings to adequately fill, or maybe more than adequately fill, one Deadzone board. I like having a lot of terrain. I think Deadzone excels when you have as much terrain as possible. The next batch of terrain I get for Deadzone, I'll probably try and build something really tall, because anyone who's ever built Lego, you know that building the tallest thing possible, creating a huge tower, is everyone's dream, isn't it? And then trying to make it stand up successfully without it toppling over is always a challenge. It's all in the width of the base. Okay, let's move on. So here is the Lord Celestant on Dracoth. Now I am very, very proud of this guy. It took me a long time to do, but prior to that he had been sitting in a box for a really, really long time. I didn't really have any idea how I was going to paint his beast, so I was just kind of sitting, waiting for a moment of inspiration to strike me, much like one of those many white lightning bolts on him. And it did. I believe it was looking at pictures of painted Dracoths by Amy Snuggs, and I saw the scales. I looked quite closely at them to see how they looked so good, and I think what it comes down to is highlighting or dry brushing, but not just in the base colour, but with white specifically. And I think that's what makes this model look so effective, because the actual rider and the armour plates and everything are nice. People especially like the scrolls, actually, the bits of parchment attached to the armour and the shield, but they're again very simple to do as well. That's really just bone colour, wash, then bone colour with a fine detail brush over the top, going between all the washed areas and staying purely on the raised parts. I might actually do a video on that because a lot of people compliment those. But anyway, back to the dry brushing of the scales. You can see in certain spots that it's clearly been dry brushed with white on the very scaly bits. And before I did that, it looked very, very flat because it was black, heavy dry brush of dark purple, then a medium dry brush of light purple, and it didn't look quite magnificent enough. But I always intended that I was going to do a really, really light dry brush of white in the end, because, like I said, I'd seen it in some quite magnificent Dracoths previously. Quite common when people are painting scales. I don't know why I didn't see it before, but I think it does push it to that next level, just that bit of white dry brush. I did have to change the order in which I paint certain parts of Stormcast Eternals, because previously I think I did a lot of the gold first, but whenever there's dry brushing involved, I really like to do that first, because it does tend to stray onto other parts of the model. It's not a very accurate process. So that was done first, all the monster skin pretty much, and then everything else followed from there. You can see here, the underside of the tail, which you can just see a little bit of, isn't quite dry brushed as much with the white, only the parts that are showing from the top. One thing I don't really like painting are those black cloaks, like the one he has there, but I think this one looks pretty good. And that was just done with edge highlighting, really. Black and grey edge highlights, and then a lighter grey edge highlights on corners, or particularly bunched up raised parts. You can see quite a good view of the gold highlighting here, particularly on the neck armour plates, which as usual with the Stormcast is the base gold, flesh wash, base gold reapplied to everywhere. I don't want there to be any kind of shadow, and then the edges with that much brighter gold. I'm sure if you were going really nuts you could then do silver highlight and then dots of white everywhere if you're a true professional, but I don't put myself in that bracket yet. Probably won't ever reach that particular bracket. I'm not really aspiring to become a legendary painter. I don't think I could ever put that much time into a model. I just want everything to look as good as possible with the amount of time I'm willing to put into it. So just picking up little tricks here and there is definitely the way to go. Things that don't take a vast amount of time but do look effective. I think I may do a video series on those kind of techniques, because even though I'm not a pro by any means, I think people out there could still possibly benefit. So let's have a look at our main image again. You can see it's just sitting on one of the Deadzone mats there. And overall I'm pretty pleased with this month of painting. And as far as September goes, I've already got some Stormcast models that I'm looking at right now that are almost finished. Just touch-ups to do, really, on them. 4 of them, I'm not going to spoil exactly what they are. And then hopefully some more Deadzone Terrain pieces. Not as big as these, but they're more like the little accessories and bridges and rubble. But my airbrush has been on the blink again, which makes priming very, very annoying. So I may just go back to using just spray cans for priming purposes and just use the airbrush for base coats, because even though I followed various tips that people have offered, it still tends to clog up a bit. I think the primer is just too thick for the airbrush, so I get a bit of priming time and then it just completely stops and I have to give it the most thorough clean imaginable just to get another few seconds out of it, which isn't really ideal. So maybe just base coats with the airbrush after priming with a can, I think, is the way to go. So that's enough for now, and I'll catch you next time, folks. Ta-ta!